In this short video, I'm going to share with you how you can start investing in property with just £25,000. Hi, my name is Mark Lloyd. I'm co-founder of Property Master Academy and been an investor now for over 16 years. Now, £25,000 when you're starting out in property might not sound like a great deal, and indeed it's not in overall property terms, but you can still invest with it. And I'm going to share with you some strategies that will work on a limited amount of money. Before I do that, what I would suggest is that you get some education. Now, as you'll know, I run an education company and we run a property investing masterclass online course which is designed for beginners, for those just starting out, and it'll give you ideas on a number of different strategies to help you get started. So when you're starting out, there are two things really you need to be looking at, particularly when you're just starting with £25,000. Firstly, building cash flow. Secondly, building your pot. The more you can build your pot, the more you can help grow your cash flow. Now, the question is whether you do those at the same time or at different times. Well, I would suggest the initial focus is building cash flow, but then also at the same time as a secondary focus, building your pot as well. And there are a number of different ways you can do that. Let's take a look at cash flow. One of the best starting strategies out there is deal sourcing. Now, deal sourcing, whilst technically not a strategy, is a very good way of earning money. It can be large sums of money for finding deals for other investors. So if I give you an example, an average sourcing fee starts around about £3,000 or 2% of the purchase price of the property, whichever is greater. Now, if you're in the north of the country, that probably means it's going to be about £3,000, maybe a little bit higher. But in the south of the country, which is where I'm based, that's usually quite a significant sum, £6,000, £7,000, £8,000, sometimes higher, on just finding a deal for one investor. You can add a lot of different things onto that, and I have done a separate video on sourcing properties, and I explain the whole sourcing model. Now, deal sourcing requires very little cash input to get started. I would say on average you're probably going to need somewhere between £2,000 to £3,000 to really get set up properly as a serious deal sourcer. Some of that money is required for registration with various authorities, and some of that money will be required for marketing, maybe perhaps building a website, which you could do extremely cheaply. But those are the base costs really to help you get started as a deal sourcer. The next strategy, which works really well for those getting started out with limited resources, is rent to rent. There are a number of different strategies within rent to rent. I'm just going to mention two here. There's the HMO model, where you're looking to either rent an existing HMO from an existing landlord and then re-rent it back out again as an HMO and making a margin in between. And you should make somewhere between £500 and £1,000 per property. In order to get into the deal, well, that can be as little as £0 up to about £5,000 per property. So a very good way of starting out with limited risk and limited financial resource. Similarly, it applies to rent to serviced accommodation, which is the second kind of rent-to-rent strategy. It was quite a good one to start out with. Both strategies require a little bit more hands-on, but require a similar amount of capital, around about £5,000 per property, although you can secure them for nothing at all. So there are a number of different ways there that you can extend that £25,000 to actually make it work for you. So if you had to pay £5,000 per property on a rent-to-rent basis, that means you could get 4 properties, and that would give you an income of somewhere between £2,000 to £4,000 per month, which for the majority of people will get them out of their job and focus more seriously on property investing. So what else is there? Well, we've also got something called lease options. Now, what is a lease option? Well, it's a way of securing a property without buying it until a later date, and in the meantime usually being able to rent out that property. And I've done a number of those deals in the past which have cost me very little money. Some legal fees, usually somewhere between £1,000 to £2,000 if you're going to pay the vendor's legal fees, and you have this £1 contract fee as well. You may have heard of buying houses for £1. Well, that's really that particular strategy is what they're talking about. And in the deals that I've done over the past 16 years now, I've made substantial amounts of money for very little input. As I said, let's say I've spent about £2,000 initial costs on the legals, but when I've sold the property eventually, I've made something like £60,000-70,000. So for a cash-on-cash return, there's extremely high returns. You could also look at a number of different variations of lease options. And in fact, there's several strategies around lease options which require very little cash input. In fact, I was talking to one of our mentees just the other day about a deal she was looking at whereby it's a very good deal, potentially could buy it as well at a discounted price. But once she'd understood what the vendor's pain was, which was his mother had gone into a care home, and it's the care home fees that were hurting, which he didn't have, and they were £2,500 per month. So what I suggested was to secure that property on an option, pay the vendor the £2,500 a month to help cover the care home agency fees, and use the rest of that money to refurbish the property to then sell it. So that not only will the vendor win because they're getting the care home fees paid and potentially a higher uplift on the property, but she's winning because she's only having to put in a small amount of money to cover the refurb and get some profit on the sale. And that's a variation, an option, sometimes called an assisted sale, an extremely profitable strategy. Taking that lease option strategy a little bit further, just to something called just the option element of it. So not the lease option, but just the option element. They're quite commonly used by developers for securing land. Now, if you can find land, and it's one of the strategies that we teach, something called land assembly, putting those parcels of land together costs very little money because you're just using an option contract again. So apart from the legal costs, you've got your option contract fee, and then there'll be some planning costs. So generally what we're looking at is securing land, doesn't currently have planning, so it doesn't really have much value, and then getting planning on that land. And that can vary quite vastly, and the costs of planning. I'm just looking at a site right now, which is in the centre of Guildford, and the figure I've had from our architect to get it through planning is £32,000. Now, it's quite a big site. We're probably going to get 8 houses on there. But you can do much smaller sites, and of course the fees concerned will be a lot less. So your £25,000 could potentially get you one very decent site, which you will make a 6-figure sum on. So extremely attractive, but also quite risky if you don't know what you're doing. So that does definitely need some education. So what else could you do with your £25,000? Well, another option is potentially to joint venture with somebody else who has got similar amount or more money. Maybe they need some input in a deal, so they've approached you for you to invest your £25,000 in their deal. And again, a way of getting involved in property with limited resource and learning as you go along as well. So potentially a very good way of investing in property. One word of caution, make sure you carry out your due diligence properly, not only on the project, but the person you're going to be working with, because that could potentially affect you further down the road. Last but by no means least, crowdfunding. With your £25,000, you could invest a portion of that into a crowdfunding platform. Now, what is a crowdfunding platform? Well, essentially a crowdfunding platform looks for developers who are looking to raise money for their projects, and then looks for investors to invest in those projects. So almost like a JV. So with our crowdfunding platform, Max Crowdfund, we look for investors to invest in those projects, and you could earn a decent return on your money. Generally speaking, 8% plus is the kind of return you'd get to receive, and those projects can last from anything from 6 months to 3 years. So a fairly secure way of earning some money and watching as the projects develop. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have, please hit the subscribe button and also the notification bell so you get notified when future videos are posted. Wherever you are on your journey, please also leave some comments below. I hope you found these suggestions useful, and I'd love to hear from you. Also, watch some of the videos that are appearing on your screen right now, as they'll help you in your property journey. Thanks for listening.